Thanks for joining me on the purpose this November 29, 2017. My name is Gladys Ambodiba. We begin this morning with the Guardian Post newspaper that is very much interested in the Anglophone crisis and writes on how the Guardian Post saw it coming 2 years ago. It has published a full text of the Guardian Post open letter to the head of state Paul Biya predicting all current happenings in the northwest and southwest regions. You have that on pages 5, 6 and 7 of today's edition of the Guardian Post newspaper. The paper again tells us how Biya is in Cote d'Ivoire for the EU summit. It says President Paul Biya and wife Chantal Biya are in the Ivory Coast capital Abidjan to attend the 5th African European Union summit, which is being hosted by the West African country Cote d'Ivoire. A press release issued by the Director of Civil Cabinet at the Presidency of the Republic said the President and wife left Yaoundé early yesterday afternoon to take part in the summit, which will run from today, Wednesday, November 29, to tomorrow, Thursday, November 30, 2017. The paper says this year's edition of the summit is holding under the theme Investing in the Youth for a Sustainable Future. At the summit, African and European leaders will look at the future of Africa and the European Union relations and focus on investing in youth in the two continents. You have the details on page 3 of the Guardian Post newspaper. And then it tells us again how over 3.5 billion francs CFA has been lost due to internet shutdown in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. According to the English daily newspaper, the shutdown of internet service in the northwest and southwest regions of the country are on two separate occasions is said to have cost the country's economy over 3.5 billion francs CFA. A research carried out by the digital rights advocacy group Access Now has revealed that the initial shutdown alone led to an accumulated loss of $3 million, a mouth-watering 1.35 billion francs CFA. To have the details on the shutdown of internet and its cost to the economy of the country, then you read page 3 of the Guardian Post newspaper. And then again, still talking about the Anglophone crisis, the paper talks about SDF National Chairman Nijan Froli and says he's trying to form a new coalition and question how trustworthy it is. If you want more on that, then you read page 2 of the Guardian Post newspaper, which equally tells us about Douala varsity lecturers, the cause of a strike, and how the Post newspaper is following up the AU-EU summit in Cote d'Ivoire. I have all that in today's edition of the Guardian Post newspaper. And then let's talk about this La Nouvelle Expression this morning that is interested in the BISEC affair and reports that the communication service of the financial institution has formally denounced news published by some media organs that its general manager Alain Repet has resigned. You read the nitty-gritty of the story on page 10 of the French daily La Nouvelle Expression. Then let's talk about Info Matin this morning. Info Matin captions on the National School for Administration and Magistracy ENAM and writes that the director Linus Toussaint Menjana needs prayers. According to the French daily Info Matin, his despicable act since 2012 when he was appointed is rather taking him closer to hell each passing day and believe he needs help. The paper says despite irregularities noted over the list of candidates admitted into the professional school, ENAM's director still finds words to accuse his hierarchy, that is the ministry or the Minister of Public Service and Administrative Reforms, over the inconsistencies and make himself the victim. Read the details on page 3 of the French daily Info Matin. Then we move over to L'Oeil du Sahel this morning that focuses on the creation of the Faculty of Medicine and the Pharmaceutical Sciences in some state universities following the decree signed over the weekend by Head of State Paul Biya. He writes that the Grand North is uncomfortable with the decrees because the schools in the areas are not taken into consideration. According to the paper, no School of Medicine and Pharmaceutical Sciences exist in the Grand North. As such, the largest is extended only to Cameroon South. More is found on page 4 and 5 of today's edition of the Tri-Weekly like the Sahel. And then we also talk about Media Freak Venkat. Media Freak Venkat captions on Kameko and Enes Zikume, who is said to be at the center of a mafia. You have that on the front page of Media Freak Venkat. And then the paper tells us about Bamenda in the northwest region of Cameroon and how economic and tells us how there is economic meltdown as SDO curfew drags on. You have that on page 4 of today's edition of the Media Freak, which again sees that development projects of priority in 2018 in Ginicom Council is a priority for the division. Have more on that in today's edition of Media Freak Venkat. Then let's talk about the Sun newspaper, which has as main caption the Anglophone crisis and how Kawe must swallow the bitter pills. That is a statement from SDF MP, member of parliament of the leading opposition Social Democratic Front Party, who has vowed that no deliberations would take place at the National Assembly until the House addresses the Anglophone issue. You have that on page 2 of the Sun newspaper. And again, the paper informs us how 2 bank robberies in Bamenda in the northwest region of the country, despite heavy military presence in that part of the country, 2 successful bank robberies have been carried out by yet to be identified individuals in the regional capital of the northwest region, that is Bamenda. A microfinance institution was attacked at about 11 a.m. that was last Wednesday at the Ntariko neighborhood, and followed by another successful attack at the following day at another microfinance institution. This time around it was at Meta quarters, all in Bamenda center. You have that on page 2 of the Sun newspaper. And then again, the Sun newspaper tells us how Cameroon gets 40 new associate professors, according to the story by Do James Sonki. The curtains were drawn last November 15, 2017 on the 18th Professional Competitive Examination in Law and Political Sciences, Academic and Management Sciences of the African and the Malagasy Council for Higher Education, better known by the French acronym AMSCAMES, with some 41 candidates declared successful out of the 103 who sat for the session. The academic grades of the 41 successful candidates have therefore been changed, as they are now associate professors. You have more on that on page 2 of the Sun newspaper. Then the Sun newspaper again tells us about Professor Ngomo Horace Manga of the University of Boya. He is the vice chancellor, who prioritizes quality at the institution. You have that on page 4 of the Sun newspaper. Then again, the Sun newspaper tells us about the Boya Council, where the MP or the Boya community bid farewell to Honorable Atuli Singe. You have that on page the last page of the Sun newspaper, who tells us how the Boya Council and deputies were absent at the funeral ceremony. You have all that in today's edition of the Sun newspaper. And then local communities equally make news in today's edition of the Sun newspaper, where you hear about local communities to be integrated in minerals development processes in Cameroon. The details are found on page 9 of today's edition of the Sun newspaper. Then let's move over to the Rambla newspaper, which tells us about Honorable Joseph Weber, who sees the National Assembly is a club for rented comedians. This says that the popular attitude of lawmakers at the National Assembly that has earned them the nickname of stand-up comedians has reached a frenetic pitch, causing many observers to question if both government and parliamentarians have not been inflicted or afflicted by some demonic spirit that has blindfolded them for their reality. The reactions are found in today's edition of the Rambla newspaper, which tells us how Bia's appeasement cash split chiefs, that is in the northwest region of Cameroon. It says the last is still to be heard of the Patriot mission involving CPDM elites who had gone to their various subdivisions in response to instructions from Gogomu Paul, Director of Cabinet, to the Prime Minister and Head of Government to hand out President Biya's goodwill message of peace, and not surprisingly, wrangling over the distribution of money carried along by the disavowed and by an extension illegitimate elite has been on the podium in some subdivisions in the northwest region of Cameroon. In line with the prevailing circumstances, the paper tells us a vote of no confidence is set to be hovering over the chief Eseme Elise of Kokobuma Chiefdom, who is the president of the Konye subdivision, and chief conference occasioned by what peers have termed skewed sharing of presidential booty from elites. You have that on page 4 of the Rambler newspaper. And then again, the paper tells us how Biya helped University of Boya students with 50,000 francs CFA, and says tension has been mounting gradually at the vicinities of the University of Boya following conflicts or conflicting signals relating to payment of students' bonanza decreed some years ago as presidential or President Biya's contribution to the emergence of genesis from the country's universities through annual award of 50,000 francs CFA to meritorious students. The details are found on page 4 of the Rambler newspaper. And again, we have a senior divisional officer who promises that to insecurity perpetrators. You have that on page 5 of the Rambler newspaper, which tells us how grueling insecurity in Lebialem division in the southwest region of Cameroon represented in persistence of acts of vandalism and civil disobedience, with the most current being the burning of Government Bilingual High School Fontaine, have pressurized his senior divisional officer, who is Zachary Ogito, to warn that he will show no mercy to anyone caught or found guilty of extreme activities. You have that on page 5 of the Rambler newspaper. That article brings us to the end of today's edition of the papers. Thanks for watching.